Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for the Gluten-Free Certification webinar. We are going to be going over navigating the general requirements for the SCS Gluten-Free Certification. My name is Holly St. Jean. I'm a project associate for the products claims team at SCS, and I'll be doing the introduction here and then handing it off to my colleague Tony for the rest of the webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few logistics. Everyone will be in listen-only mode. During the webinar, please type your questions in the questions box, and we will answer them during the Q&A portion at the conclusion of the webinar. This presentation will be recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording sometime tomorrow after the webinar. And then once the webinar has ended today, you'll be prompted to take a survey. This will only take a few minutes, but if you could please complete the survey so we could better understand your needs and continue to deliver high quality webinars, that would be great. Thank you. And now I'm going to jump into giving you a little background on SCS. SCS is a certification body located in California's Bay Area with satellite offices around the world and has been a leading organization in the movement for a safe and sustainable food system for over 38 years. We have over 15,000 clients from over 125 countries and employees based all across the globe. SCS offers an extensive suite of food safety and sustainability services. And SCS also provides public training and on-site training at customers' facilities. And we also offer self-paced online training such as HACCP and Global GAP in both English and in Spanish. Our auditing services include the GFSI benchmark certifications, Global GAP, SQF, BRCGS, and Primus GFS. The top row here features several product claim services that Tony and I are both involved in, such as NGP, gluten-free, plant-based, and organic. And that's just a little snippet of some of the things that SCS has to offer. And just a reminder, again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box and we'll go over them at the end. And now I'm going to hand it over to Tony for the remainder of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Holly, for starting us off and for the introductions, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Tony, and I am our Client Services Manager for the Products Claim Division here at SCS. I'm excited to speak with you all about our SCS Gluten-Free Standard, which is one of the leading gluten-free standards on the market today. So we'll go ahead and we'll dive right in to our presentation. So I know you all are interested in how to get certified to the SCS Gluten-Free Standard, but first, let's talk about if your products are in fact eligible to be certified. Our standard does have some restrictions on what can be certified, so let's dive into that. So the following categories of products, are eligible for certification to the SCS Gluten-Free Standard. So up first is processed foods. So this is going to include pretty much any product that is processed in any way. So this could include something like a granola bar, a sports drink, a salad dressing, anything kind of along those lines. After that, we have raw materials and ingredients, or anything considered a primary product. So this could be like a non-wheat flour, unprocessed fruits or vegetables, base ingredients like oils or gums or flavors, something along those lines as well. Next, we have over-the-counter medicines, supplements, or any products that tend to be considered a homeopathic remedy, such as like a essential oil. After that, we have topically applied products, so things such as lotions or toothpaste or similar. And last but certainly not least is going to be anything for pet food, so any kind of form of a domestic animal pet food, so dogs or cats, so any of our favorite little companions. Moving on now to items that are not eligible for certification. So our first category here, and perhaps the most important, is going to be any product that is a gluten-containing grain, contains a gluten-containing grain, or is derived from a gluten-containing grain. So, like for example, if you have an ingredient that is fermented from a gluten-containing grain, that item is not eligible for certification. We do have exceptions though, because like every good rule, there's always a exception. And that is if the ingredient or the component that is made from the gluten-containing grain is processed to remove gluten throughout the production process, it may be eligible for certification. So the best example of a process that would be acceptable is going to be distillation. So if you have an alcohol that is distilled from a gluten-containing grain, you may be able to get that certified. Other common processing methods such as fermentation or hydrolysis are not acceptable ways to process out gluten, and products or ingredients that use those types of processing cannot be used in certified products. Other categories of products that are considered not allowed to be certified are going to be live animals, any form of controlled substance under your local laws, and some medicines or drugs. If you have any doubts about if your products would fall into any of these categories, or your product doesn't seem to be listed on one of the categories listed here or on the previous slide, do reach out to us and we can talk about them and how they would fit into being certified. So now that we have figured out that your products are eligible for certification, let's review what the process of getting certified looks like. In general, we recommend giving yourself about 8 to 12 weeks to complete this certification process, and possibly, if you can, leave more time for any unexpected non-conformities that you will have to resolve before certificate issuance. The time frame in which the certification process occurs can vary drastically based on a bunch of factors. So if your ingredient suppliers are slow to respond to questions, or your production facility is not able to update their SOPs in time, or even scheduling an audit with the auditor, that is a time that both you and the auditor can make it work. These are all factors that can delay your audit. So as your auditors, we will definitely try to keep you updated throughout the process with your progress as we move forward with your audit, and to kind of keep whatever time frame you need when possible, but we'll also be transparent on any possible delays you may face. So the certification process is divided up into 6 different steps. We will go over each of these steps in more depth in the next slides, but just a quick overview first. So you will begin the process by working with our sales team to figure out the audit scope and see probably the estimated pricing of your audit. After that, you will move on to work on your onboarding documentation with our coordinator team. Next, after you've submitted all of that onboarding documentation, you will be assigned an auditor. You'll have your first online program orientation meeting. This is also where you'll get your initial documentation request, which is where we're going to request all of the initial documentation we need to review. Before then, we go onto your inspection. So then following that, you will then schedule either your virtual or your on-site inspection with your auditor. After the inspection, you will then resolve any non-conformities that you were given during your inspection with a member of our technical review team. As long as you're able to resolve all of those non-conformities, you'll then get your final certificate. If you're not able to resolve those non-conformities, then unfortunately we will have to withdraw you at that time. This process here, this is actually an annual process, and we are the ones that do monitor your yearly renewal date, and we'll reach out to you somewhere about 3 to 5 months before your renewal to get this process started every single year. We aim to complete each year's renewal before the expiration date on your certificate, which is why we may reach out to you about 5 months early. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about all kind of the different steps that we just went over. So again, the first part of your audit will be your scoping. So our sales team will work with you to figure out your certification scope. So this will include items such as the number of products and brands that you'll be adding onto your initial certification, types of production facilities that we'll be inspecting, and the ingredients that you're going to use. It is at this step that we will try to determine what classification your facility is, so we can determine if you will be eligible for a virtual inspection or if you will be required to have an on-site inspection. Virtual inspections are allowed for facilities that are dedicated to gluten-free production, whereas on-site inspections, where your auditor will come physically on-site to your facility, is required if you are handling gluten. The goal of this process is to generate an accurate quote for your scope of audit. You will receive a work order that you will sign, and then that is when we can issue your invoice and you can move forward to that next step of the process. So this next step is going to be your onboarding documentation. So after you pay your invoice, you will be introduced to our coordinator team. There, your assigned coordinator will ask you to fill out your onboarding documentation, which is going to be the information we need in order to even move forward with your audit. So that will be your package information form and your product profile. So first, let's go ahead and look at the package information form. This is a document that we collect that contains all of the information for each product that we will be evaluating in regards to its packaging. So this is going to be the name of the product, the brand name, a UPC or package code for that product, packaging size, and information on the packaging type, what countries that product is going to be sold in, and then lastly, what facility or facilities are going to be producing that product. It is important that we have this in information, and it is updated by you over the life of your certification with us. The way that your product name and your brand name are written on this form will be exactly as how they will be listed on your certificate. So the next form that I reference is going to be your product profile. This form is where you'll be listing out your product formulation in their entirety. So the SCS Gluten-Free Standard does require that you tell us all inclusions of ingredients and processing aids included in your product. So this includes any additional inputs such as additives, flavors, microbes, vitamins, carriers, etc., etc. We additionally ask for the suppliers and manufacturers for each input. You can list multiple input suppliers on this form as well. We will just need information from each supplier to prove compliance of each input. Over the life of your certification, as your product formulations change, you will also need to update these product profiles for our records. Each unique product formulation you will be submitting must have its own product profile. If you have multiple products that have the exact same formulation, then you can submit a single product profile and include all products on it. Once you submit both your package information form and product profiles to your coordinator, you will then be assigned an auditor from our auditing team. The auditor will then schedule an online program orientation meeting with you. These take about an hour to an hour and a half, and therefore giving you kind of an overview of what the audit process includes and what responsibilities that you as a participant will have. We're also going to be looking at the objectives of the audit, go over what the standard requires, what your inspection will look like, and what documentation you will need to provide. The auditor at this point can also point out any inputs of concern or potential issues they foresee for your specific audit. If you or your team have any questions or concerns as well, this is going to be one of the best times to address them with your auditor. After that meeting, your auditor will publish an initial information request where we will list all of the initial documentation you are required to submit via a platform called ShareFile. In that information request that you received on ShareFile, there'll be a few different categories of information we will be requesting. So the first is going to be your input compliance documentation. So this is going to apply for all inputs that are in scope. Next is a sampling and testing plan for your finished products, inputs, and equipment. Finally, we will have inspection documentation for your facility. So this can be any required procedures and your listed critical control points for gluten contamination, as well as trainings, business licenses, etc., etc. So let's take a look at the different ingredient compliance documentation that we will request. As you submit input documentation for each and all inputs, your auditor assigns a risk level to each ingredient, considering the potential for gluten contamination throughout the supply chain. This risk level is then used to determine the appropriate testing frequency. But to start, there are a few options for the different compliance documentation that you can submit. So the first is going to be a spec sheet. And so this is going to be from your supplier, and this spec sheet will also contain a breakdown of your ingredient. For an example, if you have a chocolate chip, let's say, in your product, we would want to see that the breakdown includes the cocoa powder, the sugar, the cocoa butter. Maybe it includes vanilla, which means we'd also want to see the breakdown of the vanilla itself, etc. And so that should all be included on the spec sheets. Or like for another example, if you have a flavor, we would want to know the breakdown of that flavor, which may include like a carrier oil and a flavoring component. We'd also want to know what the flavoring component is derived from, what that oil is, etc. You can also submit a gluten-free certificate if the input supplier is already certified to a gluten-free certification. So there is one caveat with this though. If your input supplier is not certified to the SCS Gluten-Free Standard and is in fact certified to another gluten-free standard, then that certification has to match the SCS Gluten-Free Standard. So what this means is that that specific certification scheme has to require testing for inputs and finished products, and finished products and inputs must be tested to 10 parts per million or lower. If you do not know the specifics of the certification that they hold and what it requires, then we'll pretty much just ask you to get a copy of the standard from your input supplier, and then we can review it and approve that as a approved gluten-free certification. Lastly, the supplier can also submit a gluten-free statement declaration that they test their products to 10 parts per million or lower, and can guarantee that the products will contain no more than 10 parts per million, or, this is what I'm going to recommend mostly, they can submit a completed gluten-free declaration as seen on this slide. In general, we require all inputs to have at least the spec sheet, and then either you collect the gluten-free certificate if the input is certified, or you have the supplier fill out this gluten-free declaration here. If the supplier submits a valid gluten-free certificate for the products, or they fill out the gluten-free declaration in a way that proves there's going to be no risk of contamination and states the input will test at 10 parts per million or lower of gluten, then we may be able to lower the risk level of any medium or high risk input. Your auditor will talk more in depth about how lowering that risk level works, probably during your opening meeting and throughout your time with them. So what exactly is a low, medium, and high risk ingredient? So first here, we're going to look at low risk ingredients. Low risk ingredients are ingredients that have a minimal risk of gluten contamination within its supply chain. These ingredients will not need testing. Some examples of inputs that would be considered low risk are going to be any form of animal derived ingredients, so honey, dairy, meat, butter, etc. Nuts, herbs, potatoes, salts. This is just a small sample of what inputs can be low risk. There are many other low risk inputs, so you can always ask us if your input specifically is low risk. Medium risk ingredients are going to be ingredients that have some risk of gluten contamination in its supply chain due to potential overlap with gluten-containing grains or gluten-containing ingredients. These ingredients do require some testing. So some example of ingredients that are considered medium risk would be corn, rice, seeds, lentils, and more. This would also include any ingredient that is derived from these crops. So an example of that would be cornstarch from corn, or even tofu derived from soy. If an ingredient contains even a small component that would include one of these ingredients or is an ingredient derived from them, the entire ingredient is considered medium risk. So for another example of this, you can think of a flavor. In that flavor, maybe it's made up of like 20% corn oil. That corn oil, even though it is a very small amount, will make the entire flavor medium risk by default. Medium risk inputs can be downgraded to low risk, either with a gluten-free certification from the ingredient supplier or a completed and signed gluten-free declaration from the ingredient supplier. And last but certainly not least is going to be the high risk ingredients. So these are ingredients that have a high risk of gluten contamination in its supply chain due to overlap with gluten-containing grains or gluten-containing ingredients. These ingredients or their derivatives do require frequent testing. The only crop that is classified as high risk is going to be oats and anything derived from oats. You can lower oat ingredients to medium risk with a gluten-free declaration signed by your supplier. You can also lower them to low risk if the oats or the ingredient that the oats make up is gluten-free certified already. So now that we've mentioned testing earlier and kind of while we're talking about the different ingredients, let's talk a little bit more in depth about it, as this does tend to be one of our most asked about topics in audits. Testing is important because before you can move forward with your inspection, you must already have your testing procedures in place and approved by your auditor. So there are 3 different types of testings that you may have to do. So the first is testing of your finished product. All participants and facilities will need to do some testing on their finished product, no matter the risk level of the product or facility. Testing must be completed before shipping finished goods to consumers. The second type of testing that may not apply to everyone is going to be ingredient testing. So you will need to do ingredient testing for any ingredient that is considered medium or high risk. Your auditor, after collecting all input documentation from your suppliers, will give you a list of all your ingredients, and you will know which ingredients are considered medium or high risk. If none of your ingredients are considered medium or high risk, then you will not be required to do ingredient testing. Ingredient testing must be completed before being used in finished products. So the last test that you may have, the last testing requirement you may have is going to be on your production equipment. So you may have to test your equipment before a run of SCS gluten-free certified product if your facility is not dedicated. We'll talk more about that in a bit. When conducting testing, you can do it via one of two different ways. The first is going to be conducting your testing in-house with a rapid testing kit. These testing kits must be AOAC certified and test for gluten to 10 parts per million or lower. So if you're selling in a country that requires gluten-free labeling at a lower limit, then you'll have to source a test kit that tests to that lower limit. Tests, I believe, can range anywhere from $25 to $50 each. I may be not 100% correct in that, but that's generally the cost for each one. The second way that you can test is going to be sending samples to an outside lab. These labs must be ISO 17025 accredited for gluten testing, or they must use a test kit that is AOAC certified and tests to 10 parts per million or lower. The same thing as in the in-house testing. If you're selling in a country that requires lower testing limits, your lab must also test to that lower limit. You can use any combination of in-house and lab testing if you would wish. You just need to outline when you use what method in your SOPs. So we are going to conduct a quick little attendee poll. So please check your screens now. I just want to go ahead and launch that. So we do want to know what type of facility classification do you have. So A, dedicated facility to gluten-free production, B, non-dedicated facility with dedicated equipment, or C, non-dedicated facility with shared equipment. For those of you that are unsure, dedicated facilities mean that you do not have gluten-containing grains in the facility. Non-dedicated facilities mean you do have gluten-containing grains in your facility. Okay. Give it a few more seconds here. Last ones. Okay, I'm going to close it out now, and let's go ahead and share these results here. All right, so it looks like most of you that are joining us do have non-dedicated facilities with shared equipment. So this means that your equipment also runs gluten-containing grains or ingredients that contain those. So that's definitely good to know. And then the other majority of you also has a dedicated facility. That is good to know. And the reason why we wanted to talk about that is because it does kind of matter for the next part that we're going to discuss, because it's important for you to know what type of testing you will be required to do. So let's dive into that just a little bit more. Even though finished good testing is always required, we require different testing amounts depending on your facility's type and what it's classified as. For dedicated facilities, so again, meaning a facility that does not handle gluten within its walls, which looks like it's about 40% of y'all, it's going to be under this classification. You are only required to test one lot of certified finished good per month at minimum. So even if you're producing grapes, let's say for example, which are considered low risk, your facility only handles grapes, not even wine, which we would all love, just grapes, you will need to test the finished good once per month. And just for clarification, a month is considered a calendar month. So if you run production in any one calendar month, you must test in that month. So for the next type, for non-dedicated facilities with dedicated equipment, you will be required to test 2 lots of finished product per month. Again, where a month is considered a calendar month. Dedicated equipment means that the equipment used to produce the SCS gluten-free certified products will never have gluten-containing grains or any derivative on them. So that looks like that was 13% of y'all had that classification. And then the third one is going to be a facility that is not dedicated and also shares equipment for certified products with products that contain gluten. So you will have to test your finished goods more often on these. The first 3 lots of SCS gluten-free certified product produced must be tested after you run a production batch containing gluten. If you only run 1 or 2 lots of SCS gluten-free certified product after a gluten production batch, then you only have to test those 1 or 2 lots. This must take place every time you run a certified lot after a gluten-containing lot. Even if there are lots in between where there's a gluten-containing lot, a gluten-free lot that's not certified, and then a certified lot, we still have to assume that anything before the certified lot may contain gluten. Lastly, if you're selling whole beans or seeds as a finished good, you may also conduct a visual inspection of them. We won't go in depth about that today, but if this does apply to you, please let your auditor know and they can kind of explain a little bit better what is required. So next we're going to look at ingredient testing. So like I mentioned earlier, ingredients that are medium or high risk require testing. These risk levels are determined by the documentation you submit to your auditor in the initial documentation request. The table here explains a little bit more about the requirements. So for medium risk ingredients on this chart here, you can see you're only required to test once per lot per shipment. So however the supplier defines a lot of the ingredient you are purchasing, you only have to test once, unless that lot is divided up into multiple shipments. So if you receive, let's say, like 1,000-pound tote of cornstarch that is considered one lot, you only have to test once. But if you receive corn via rail car and a lot of that corn is divided up into 5 separate rail cars, you will need to test each one of those rail cars because those are 5 separate shipments. If you have a high-risk ingredient, the testing requirements are a little more heavy. And again, this is going to be only for oats at this time. So you must test 3 times per lot. If you receive a lot in less than 3 separate containers, then you only have to test each container once. So if you receive, let's say, 50 packages of oats that's in a single lot, you must pick 3 packages out of the 50 to test. If you receive 2 500-pound containers of oats, then you only need to test each of those 2 containers once. The third type of testing we mentioned earlier is equipment testing. So equipment testing is only required for non-dedicated facilities that use shared equipment for gluten-containing products and SCS gluten-free certified products. This testing will be done on the physical equipment itself after your cleaning has been completed as a validation procedure before you start production of SCS gluten-free products. You will test 3 separate locations along your production line. This will be 3 of your highest risk areas of contamination, which you will figure out what those places are through analysis of your critical control points. Some common places on your production line that are going to be the highest risk are going to be mixers or extruders or packaging equipment. It really is different for everybody, but those are just some of our more common places that we see. So as you confirm your various testing requirements for your scope of audit, so again, finished good, ingredient, or equipment, you will then be required to fill out a sampling and testing profile. This profile will help your auditor guarantee the implementation of a sampling and testing program during your audit, and it will also additionally help you in your operation to ensure adequate measures are taken to prevent gluten contamination. The profile includes questions on how you will sample, what testing kits or labs you will use, guides on testing best practices, and just confirming that you are in fact training your staff. So moving forward and looking at the various audit requirements. So the standard does require that you identify your various critical control points throughout your production process. And you're going to identify the different points where there is a high risk of gluten contamination. With each of these critical control points, the goal is also that you will need to find ways to reduce the risk of these areas of potential contamination. So here is an example of common points in your production process based solely on your facility classification. Since every facility and production process is totally different, this list is not going to be applicable to everyone, but as you and your team work to evaluate your process and look for all the different areas of potential contamination, these are going to be some areas of concern that we tend to find in facilities. The more high risk your facility, the more potential areas of contamination that we find. From ingredient receiving to processing equipment to shipping areas to your own staff, do they potentially contaminate themselves on their hands from their lunch or something like that? It's up to you and your team to evaluate all parts of your process that may have a risk. There are multiple ways that you can show your critical control point review. So you can submit your HACCP flow chart like shown here, where each step in the process is highlighted and your critical control points are listed. You can submit your HACCP plan that includes CCPs as well. If your procedures happen to include them and all your potential areas of contamination are noted, that will also work for compliance, or you can always submit your FESMA plan. So for your facility, they will need to have a comprehensive list of procedures to be able to comply with the SCS Gluten-Free Standard. Every facility, no matter how big or small, will be required to have all applicable SOPs made and finalized by the time you go to your inspection. During your inspection, we set aside the longest amount of time to review the SOPs the standard does require. So a few types of procedures that may be required are going to be like a procedure for internal audits, to specifically the SCS Gluten-Free Standard, a procedure for corrective actions of all of your non-conformities, whether those are found internally or externally, a procedure for how your facility would handle contaminated finished goods, ingredients, etc., and then a procedure for reporting suspected contamination and mislabeling of products or ingredients. So while these are just a couple SOPs that will be required, we really have to emphasize that all facilities will be required to show various SOPs to be certified. But on that note, the newest version of the standard now allows for us to be able to lower the requirements of SOPs. So if your facility is certified to a GFSI recognized or CGMP food safety certification, we can then ask for less SOPs during your inspection. Every food safety certification may cover different standard requirements, so please let your auditor know and they can advise you on what specific requirements that specific food safety certification covers. Note that the facility must be fully certified to that standard by the time of the audit inspection and must be able to show a current certificate to the auditor to qualify for the reduced SOP review. And you can notice here that SCS does offer does offer these different GFSI recognized food safety certifications, so we can handle both for you if you would like. Okay, so once we have done everything and all of your requirements are confirmed, so that's going to be your input compliance documentation that is collected, which means that then your inputs in your facility have been properly risked, your sampling and testing profile has been completed and approved, and your CCPs and your SOPs completed and are ready for review. We can now schedule your inspection. We assume inspections will be around 4 to 6 hours. If your facility is dedicated to gluten-free production or is non-dedicated with dedicated equipment, then we can schedule a virtual inspection. For virtual inspections, we will require that you have a strong internet connection that will enable you to take your auditor live on a tour of your facility with whatever device you choose, be that like a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone. For the documentation review portion of your audit, where we will review your SOPs and CCPs, we will ask that you have a computer where you can share the screen to show the various documents that we ask for. If your facility is classified as a non-dedicated with shared equipment, you may also be required to have an on-site inspection. For those audits, you will schedule a date and time that will work best for you and your auditor. For these, we will need to dedicate a space for your auditor to conduct the audit with your team, as well as have a private space for them to complete their review. If your facility requires specific clothing requirements to conduct the walkthrough tour, you must let the auditor know beforehand, and you must provide items like hair nets, gloves, foot booties, etc. If those are required, since that's not something that most people commonly have on hand. So while you are getting ready for this inspection, you should consult the inspection preparation form. We have provided this document as a guide for what SOPs will be requested during your audit. It is recommended you use this form during your preparations for your inspection to ensure that you have SOPs that cover all of these requirements. This list is not necessarily exhaustive, but it does give you a pretty good idea on what documentation will be required for your inspection. We've divided it into 2 separate parts. The first is a list of all of SOPs that all facilities will be required to have ready and finalized by the time the audit is completed. The lower section is SOPs that facilities that are not dedicated are required to have in addition to the ones above. So that would be both non-dedicated with dedicated equipment and non-dedicated with shared equipment. Your auditor can answer any questions you have about these specific requirements listed here, but we cannot recommend specific ways to implement these SOPs. We can only advise you on the requirements themselves. So what does that inspection look like? So they will be divided up into 6 different components, so we will go through them here. We're going to start off with the opening meeting. So this is where we will go over who the audit team is on both sides, confirm the scope of the audit as well as the audit plan, clarify the objectives, answer any concerns, and reiterate your confidentiality of the audit. After that is completed, we will jump into a complete review of your SOPs and documentations, such as your CCPs. So we will be examining how your procedures match up with the requirements of the standards. If you follow the inspection preparation form, then your facility will largely be successful in showing compliance documentation. If your facility cannot show specific SOPs or documentation during this portion of the audit, or the SOPs provided do not match the requirements of the standard, you will be issued a finding for that during this time. Your auditor will explain why the documentation provided does not meet the requirements of the standard if that does happen. After that portion, we will go ahead and complete our facility walkthrough. So during this time, you will take the auditor around your facility, either physically or virtually on camera, and have them observe all of your processes, inspect storage areas, review records, and also interview staff if needed. Following that, we will then go into seeing how you will test your products. So if you're doing your testing in-house, you will need to conduct a mock test with whatever testing kit you have chosen. This is where you will show how you pick the items to sample, how you conduct the test, how you record your results. If you're going to send samples to an outside lab, we will want to see how to pick up your sample, how you package it for shipping to the lab, and also how you record the information. If you're required to test your equipment, we will also want you to show where you will test the 3 separate areas on your production line and why you chose those 3 separate areas. That will be testing. So after that, the auditor will go ahead and take some time to review all of the notes and prepare your findings. The auditor will generally do this separately without you in the room, and then they will let you know when it is time for the final part, which is going to be our closing meeting. So after all of the findings are compiled, you will then all get to come together in a final closing meeting. At this closing meeting, we will summarize all findings that were found during the inspection. And then after the findings are given, you will get them on one final exit interview sheet, which you will sign, and then you will give back to us before we close the meeting. And then that will be the end of the inspection. So these are the 6 key components. So once you completed this inspection, your auditor will then pass on the audit findings to a technical reviewer. The technical reviewer will then review the findings noted by the auditor and then determine if the findings are to be considered a non-conformity or can be kept as observations. The auditors themselves do not determine this. This will be the technical reviewer. If the reviewer determines that all findings noted can be classified as observations, then we can issue your certificate right away, and you'll be able to work through those observations before the following year's renewal audit. If any finding is then considered a non-conformity by the technical reviewer, those must be corrected and implemented before your final certificate can be issued. Once you work with the technical reviewer on closing each non-conformity, then they will approve your audit for final certification. Your assigned coordinator will then generate your gluten-free certificate and we'll send it over to you. Then we can officially say, congratulations, your products are officially SCS Gluten-Free Certified. Woo! And then of course, we will see you for your annual audit next year. And so that was your roadmap on how to be certified. I definitely thank you guys for joining us. I think we do have a few questions though. Holly, I know you've been monitoring the questions. Would you mind hopping back on and we can maybe go through those? And just quick note, there is a post-webinar survey at the end of this. So once we get through this, it will pop up on your screen as soon as we end this. So please stay for that. All right, Holly, what do we have?
Yeah, so we got quite a few questions here in regards to testing.
Okay.
One of them being, for finished product testing, is it one lot per type of product? For example, for a dedicated facility doing 1 lot per month, would that be per flavor if they have 15 flavors? Or would that be 15 tests per calendar month?
That is a fantastic question. So it is only going to be, if you are a dedicated facility, you only have to test one flavor once per month. You do not have to test each flavor, and you do not have to do up to 15 tests per calendar month. You're only required to do a maximum of 1.
Great.
Fantastic question.
Next question, also in regards to testing, are all products required to meet less than 10 parts per million, even though the FDA standard for gluten-free is less than 20 parts per million?
Yes. Okay. I do love this question. So thank you for whoever asked it. Yes, all products are required to meet the 10 parts per million threshold, rather than the FDA's definition of gluten-free at 20 parts per million. For a little bit of context, there is still evidence that shows that extremely sensitive people can still have reactions to gluten at around 20 parts per million, compared to at 10 parts per million. There's very little chance of a reaction. So essentially, we like to think of ourselves as the more complete standard than what the FDA requires for gluten-free labeling.
Excellent. Great, thank you, Tony. And then another question for testing as well. This is in regards to enzymes being derived from different kinds of substrates. So if an enzyme was fermented with a substrate that's not containing gluten versus one that's derived from a substrate that is containing gluten, but they're both testing at less than 10 parts per million, how would that work?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. Matter of fact, I'm actually dealing with this now. The way that the standard is written, there is still no allowance for a gluten-containing grain to be used as a substrate for a enzyme. So a little bit of context on enzymes. We evaluate the substrate for the enzyme, or even like a microbe, as 100% of the enzyme, essentially. So we essentially assume that that substrate is also the enzyme as well. And so what that means is, because the standard does not allow for any gluten-containing grain to be used in your products, it means that you cannot use it as a substrate. The only exception to this is that if that gluten-containing grain, before it's used as a substrate, is distilled, or if whatever product that enzyme uses or makes, I should say, is also distilled. Unfortunately, fermentation is not a complete enough process to break down the gluten proteins to ensure that we won't get a reaction out of somebody with really high sensitivity celiac. So if your enzyme is produced with a substrate that does not contain a gluten-containing grain, then you absolutely can use it. It just still has to test below the 10 parts per million. But in conclusion, if it does use a gluten-containing grain, unfortunately, it cannot be used in our standard. I hope that answered that question. I know it was kind of a roundabout way to answer it. Holly, I don't know if you had any other part wanted to answer with that, or if you think that was good.
No, I think that makes sense to me. Just looking at this next question that just popped up here. It says, my company purchases ingredients that are gluten-free from suppliers who are gluten-free certified. Those ingredients go into finished products, and the label claims has a gluten-free symbol, but my facility is not gluten-free certified. Does my facility need their own gluten-free certification?
That's a really, really good one as well. Yes. So the answer is yes, your facility does need its own separate certification if you want to use the SCS gluten-free logo. If you want to make your own self-made statement, that is kind of up to you. But yes, if you want to use the logo, your facility also has to be inspected, as well as your ingredients do have to be reviewed. If you remember earlier, we talked about how some gluten-free certifications don't qualify. They're not the same. They're not as strict as the SCS gluten-free one. So those certifications would have to be evaluated as well for your ingredients. So it's kind of like we still have to do the whole process for that. Yeah, that's a really good one.
And just kind of off of this question, if we didn't own our own production space and we use a co-manufacturer who makes our product, who would be responsible for handling the certification?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good one that we definitely run into a lot. We generally recommend that the manufacturer of the product be the one to be certified. The reasoning behind that is that generally the co-packer is the one with the relationship with your input suppliers. So that way they can, one, ask for the input compliance documentation, and also the facility will be the entity that is required to create and implement this huge amount of SOPs that we are about to ask them for. And they're also going to be the entity that is going to be handling the sampling and testing of all products and inputs and potentially equipment. So all of this is just to say, like, your facility will have the most amount of work to do. So we generally recommend that they be the one in charge of getting the certification on your behalf. There are pluses and minuses of doing that. Of course, it's not required. You as the brand can for sure handle the certification. It's just that there's going to be a lot of back and forth with the facility. Additionally, if you do not own your own production facility and you want to be the participant as the brand, you really need to make sure that you have buy-in from your production facility, because otherwise certification will not be possible, because again, they're going to be having a really heavy burden on them. So that's like probably one of my biggest recommendations is you have the facility do it. And if you don't have the facility do it, you just make sure you have their complete buy-in on this process.
Great. Yeah, that's a question I get a lot as well.
Yep.
And then for documentation, a quick question for the gluten-free declaration that we have everyone fill out if they're not already using a gluten-free certified ingredient, who is filling out that form?
Definitely a very good one. It should be your ingredient supplier or the manufacturer should fill out those forms.
Great. And then I don't know if you have an answer to this one here, but it says, what is your stance on gluten-free wheat starch?
Gluten-free wheat starch. I don't know if I have a personal stance on it. As a standard though, we will not allow it unless that wheat starch is distilled, which I don't know how it would be. I've actually never heard of that. Something I'm going to have to look into. But currently in the SCS Gluten-Free Standard, like I said earlier, because there's no allowance for gluten to be used in products, we would probably not allow it unless you can prove it's processed in a way to remove gluten, and probably the only processing we'll accept at this time is going to be distillation. So not sure about that one. I won't give you a 100% answer. That's something maybe we could explore a little bit more for whoever asked that question.
Great. And I think that might be time. We have a couple more questions, but what are your thoughts, Tony?
No, yeah, this is perfect. Thank you all for joining us. If we have any more questions, Holly or I will reach out directly to you to answer your specific question before the end of the week. Other than that, we do have an end poll, so please stay just a couple more minutes and fill out that survey for us. But other than that, have a fantastic, today's Tuesday, one of the last days of the month, or it is the last day of the month. So enjoy the end of April and the beginning of May. And thank you all for joining Holly and I on this journey.
Thank you.
Right, goodbye, everybody, and thank you so much.